The late afternoon sun was a hazy orange disk, struggling to penetrate the smog that hung over downtown Detroit. I was in my garage, a sanctuary filled with the scent of old oil and sawdust, trying to restore a vintage Mustang, a project I'd started to fill the silence in my life. The radio was playing some old classic rock tune, but even the familiar rhythm couldn't drown out the low thrum of my own anxiety. It had been 3 weeks since I'd last heard from him. 3 weeks of quiet. Then the phone buzzed in my pocket. My stomach tightened. The screen lit up with the caller ID. Ryan. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the workbench. It wasn't a call to ask how I was doing. It wasn't a call to tell me about a new job or a new girlfriend. It was never a call for anything but one thing. The last time he called, it was for $200 to fix his car. The time before that, $300 for rent. Before that, $100 for groceries. The excuses were as predictable as the sun rising in the east. My wife Sarah used to tell me to just give him the money. "He's our son, David," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. "You can't just turn your back on him." But Sarah's been gone for 3 years, and with her the one voice that could always soften my resolve. Now it was just me and this heavy silence. I swiped the screen to answer. "Hello?" My voice was rougher than I intended. "Dad? Hey, it's me." Ryan's voice was a practiced blend of casual warmth and underlying desperation. He was a master at it. He'd been an only child, and maybe that was part of the problem. We gave him everything, and he, in turn, learned how to take everything. "Ryan, what's up?" I didn't waste time on pleasantries. The less room I gave him, the less he could manipulate. "Oh, things are tight right now, Dad. Real tight." I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that felt like it carried the weight of a decade. "What do you need, Ryan?" He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Always straight to the point, huh?" "Look, it's about the car again. The transmission is shot. I need to get it fixed so I can get to work. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my job, and you know how hard it is to find a good one." The story was different, but the core was the same. The plea, the thinly veiled threat of his life falling apart, and the implied responsibility I had to keep it together. I knew his car was just fine. I knew he was probably at a bar, or at a friend's house, or somewhere else he shouldn't be, and he'd run out of cash. "Ryan, you told me last month you needed money for the car," I said, my voice rising a little despite my best efforts. "You said you fixed it." "Yeah, well, this is a new problem, Dad. A bigger problem. I swear, it's for real this time. You know I wouldn't call if I didn't absolutely need it. I'm just in a tough spot." I leaned against the workbench, the cold steel grounding me. I looked at the rusted shell of the Mustang. I wasn't just fixing this car. I was trying to fix a part of myself, a part that felt broken and useless. It was a tangible project, with predictable results. You turn a bolt, it tightens. You sand a surface, it becomes smooth. There was none of that certainty with Ryan. "I can't, Ryan," I said, the words a bitter taste in my mouth. "What do you mean you can't? Dad, please, I swear I'll pay you back, as soon as I get my next paycheck." "You never pay me back," I said, my voice a whisper. The truth of it hung in the air, a final, unarguable fact. The other end of the line was silent for a moment, then his tone shifted. The desperation was replaced by a cold edge of resentment. "Fine. If you're going to be like that, then fine. Don't help me, but don't expect to hear from me again." The threat was an old one. He'd used it since he was a teenager, a weapon to make me feel guilty, to make me bend. This time, though, it didn't work. It just sounded tired. It sounded like the end of a long, painful story. I felt a surge of something, not anger, not sadness, but a strange, unsettling clarity. It was an end. "Ryan," I said, and the name felt like a weight on my tongue. "Call me when you're not in a tough spot. Call me just to talk. Call me to say hi." "I can't do that," he said, his voice flat. "I'm busy." He hung up just like that. The line went dead. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was heavier, more profound. It wasn't a temporary quiet. It was a permanent one. I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, the screen dark. I looked at the Mustang, at the dusty tools on my workbench. I thought about Sarah, about how she would have handled this. She would have told me to call him back, to apologize, to just give him the money. She would have said that $100 was nothing compared to the bond between a father and a son. But Sarah didn't have to live with the aftermath. She didn't have to feel the slow, steady erosion of trust and love. With a deep breath, I opened the contacts on my phone. I scrolled to his name. The picture was an old one, taken years ago, of Ryan on his high school graduation day. He was smiling, his eyes bright with a future that at the time seemed limitless. We were so proud of him. He had the world at his feet. I held my thumb over the block number option. My hand trembled slightly. This was it, the final act, the last chance to save myself from the slow poison of his demands. It wasn't about the money, it was about the respect, the recognition, the simple truth that I was more than a walking ATM to him. I was his father. I pressed the button. A small pop-up appeared on the screen. Block this contact. You will no longer receive calls or messages from this number. I pressed yes. The screen went back to my home page, and the contact was gone. My phone, once a source of anxiety, now felt lighter. The silence was absolute. It was a silence that spoke volumes. It was the silence of a door being shut, not slammed in anger, but quietly, with a weary finality. I went back to the Mustang. I picked up a wrench and started working. The metal was cold under my fingers, but the feeling was real, tangible. It was something I could fix, something I could see from start to finish. Unlike the ghost of a relationship I had just let go, a relationship that had been nothing but a ghost for a very long time. The next morning, the silence was even more pronounced. It wasn't just a lack of sound, but an absence of a specific kind of tension. I woke up without the usual knot in my stomach, the one that formed around the thought of an incoming call, a new excuse, another disappointment. The sunlight, filtering through the blinds, felt brighter than usual. The world outside my window, the rustling leaves of the old oak tree, the distant hum of traffic on the street, seemed to possess a clarity I hadn't noticed in years. It was as if I'd been living with a persistent, low-grade hum of anxiety, and now it was finally gone. I made a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, a small, simple pleasure. I sat at the table, the same table where Sarah and I had planned our lives, where we'd helped Ryan with his homework, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. It felt different now. The absence of Sarah was a dull, constant ache. The absence of Ryan's calls was a new, raw wound, but one I had inflicted on myself for my own good. I opened my laptop to check the news, a routine I'd kept since retirement. My eyes, however, kept drifting to my phone, lying on the counter. I'd blocked his number, but my mind was playing tricks on me. I imagined a message, a text, a call from a different number. I knew it was irrational. The decision was made. But years of habit are hard to break. The phone remained silent. Later that day, I drove to the garage, a place I'd taken over after my old boss, Gus, retired. It was more a hobby than a business now. It was where I went to escape, to be surrounded by the comforting, predictable logic of machines. My friend Marcus, a grizzled mechanic who'd worked with Gus for decades, was hunched over a Ford F-150, his head buried under the hood. "Morning, Dave," he said, his voice muffled. He didn't look up, just kept working. Marcus had a way of reading a person's mood without needing to see their face. He and Sarah were the only people who truly understood the mess with Ryan. "Morning, Marcus," I replied, grabbing a wrench from the tool rack. The weight of the metal felt solid in my hand. He emerged from under the hood, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. His eyes, kind but tired, met mine. "He call?" I shook my head. "He did." I blocked the number. Marcus just nodded. He didn't say, "I told you so," even though he'd been telling me to do it for years. He knew how much courage it had taken. "Good," was all he said. It was long overdue. I leaned against the workbench, the same one where I had made the decision yesterday. I feel like I'm giving up on him. Marcus set his wrench down with a metallic clatter. "You're not giving up on him, Dave. You're giving him a chance to grow up. You've been his safety net for so long, he never learned how to walk without it. You can't live his life for him." He looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. A man can't stand up if he's got someone holding him up all the time. His words hit me. He was right. I had been enabling Ryan, not helping him. I had been so afraid of him failing that I'd never given him a chance to succeed on his own. It was a truth I had been running from for years. We worked on the F-150 for a while, the rhythmic clinking of tools and the low rumble of the radio filling the space. The work was therapeutic. It was a physical manifestation of a mental process. Disassemble the broken parts, clean them, and put them back together correctly. I wished it were so simple with people. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking about all the times Ryan had asked for money. The first time it was small, $100 for a textbook he'd lost. I gave it to him without a second thought. I was proud I could help my son. But then the requests got bigger, the excuses more elaborate. They started coming more frequently. The textbook turned into rent. The rent turned into car payments. The car payments turned into a vague need for help. I never asked for proof, I just gave it. I wanted to be the hero, the one he could always count on. I wanted him to love me, to be proud of me, to need me. I hadn't realized that my need for him to need me was exactly what was destroying him. I thought about Sarah. She was always the one to see the good in him, even when I couldn't. She'd say things like, "He's got a good heart, David. He just needs a little push." But what if my constant pushing had just made him sink deeper? What if my help wasn't help at all? Driving home, the streets of Detroit looked different. The old familiar landmarks, the crumbling brick factories, the graffiti-covered walls, the grand yet faded architecture of the downtown core seemed to speak of a different kind of neglect. They told a story of a city that had been pushed to its limits, that had lost its way, but was slowly, painfully starting to rebuild. I felt a kinship with it. I, too, had been pushed to my limit. I, too, was trying to rebuild. The next few days were a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The phone remained silent. I had no new texts, no new voicemails. My phone, once an appendage I was always aware of, was now just a tool. It felt liberating. But with that liberation came a profound loneliness. It wasn't just Ryan's absence I was feeling, but the absence of the constant drama that had defined our relationship. Without the conflict, there was a void. I started spending more time on the Mustang. I spent hours sanding down rust, replacing old parts, bringing the beautiful lines of the classic car back to life. It was a slow, painstaking process, a metaphor I knew for my life. One evening, I was on my way home and a car passed me on the interstate. It was a beaten-up sedan, and in the passenger seat, I saw a flash of a familiar face. It was too fast to be sure, but my heart pounded in my chest. It looked like Ryan. He was with a group of people and their faces were obscured, but the hair, the profile, it was him. He looked tired, his head slumped against the window. He didn't see me. I felt a pang of fear, of something I couldn't name. It was the first time I'd seen him since I'd made the decision, and seeing him just for a moment brought all the doubt back. Had I gone too far? Was he okay? Was he truly in a bad place and I had abandoned him? I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The silence of my phone felt less like a victory and more like a punishment. The relief had been temporary. The doubt was here to stay. The journey of letting go, I realized, was much harder than I had anticipated. It was an act of faith, a gamble, and the stakes were higher than any amount of money. The stakes were my son's life and my own peace of mind. The fleeting glimpse of Ryan on the highway haunted me for days. It was a vivid and unsettling image, a ghost of my son in a car that looked like it was falling apart, with people I didn't know. My mind, a tireless engine of anxiety, began to churn. Was he in trouble? Was he homeless? Was he sick? I had no way of knowing. The ironclad decision I had made, the emotional wall I had built, now felt less like a fortress and more like a prison I had locked myself into. The silence was no longer liberating. It was deafening. I threw myself into the Mustang project with a new, almost frantic energy. I worked late into the nights, the glow of the single light bulb in the garage casting long, distorted shadows around me. The smell of metal and grease became my constant companion. I was trying to outrun my thoughts, to lose myself in the predictable mechanics of a car, a broken carburetor, a faulty starter. These were problems I could solve. Human problems felt infinitely more complicated. One afternoon, Marcus found me with my head buried under the hood of the old Ford. He just stood there for a minute, and I could feel his gaze on me, a steady, calm presence. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Dave," he said, his voice low. I emerged, wiping my brow. "Just trying to get this thing done." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're trying to keep your mind busy. It's a different thing. You can't outrun your own head, my friend." I grunted, turning back to the engine. What am I supposed to do? Sit in a quiet house and wonder if my son's sleeping in his car? Marcus took a seat on a rusty oil drum, his large hands resting on his knees. "You're a good man, David, a good father, the best a man can be in this situation. You've given him more chances than most people would. You can't save a man who doesn't want to be saved. He has to want it himself." "But what if he's hit rock bottom and he needs me? What if this time is different?" I asked, the words tumbling out. "It might be," Marcus conceded, "but he has to make the first move. The call can't be from you. It has to be from him. He has to find his way to you, not the other way around. He has to show you that he understands the rules now, and the rules are, this isn't a bank, it's a relationship." I felt a surge of frustration. "But he can't call. I blocked his number, remember?" Marcus just looked at me. "He can call from a different number. He can call from a payphone. He can show up at your house. If he wants to talk to you, he'll find a way." The simplicity of his logic was both infuriating and liberating. It forced me to face the truth. My action hadn't been to permanently sever our relationship, but to change the terms of it. I had handed the power back to him. If he wanted a relationship, he had to work for it. He had to be the one to bridge the gap. The next few weeks were a test of my resolve. The silence was broken by an occasional call from an unknown number. My heart would leap into my throat. I would answer, my voice tight, only to find it was a telemarketer or a wrong number. Each time I felt a mix of disappointment and relief. The anxiety was a constant companion, a ghost in my quiet house. To fight the loneliness, I started looking for other things to fill the void. I joined a local coffee shop's morning regulars. It was a group of retirees who met every morning to talk about news, sports, and old times. Their chatter was a welcome noise. It wasn't the kind of deep, meaningful conversation I had with Sarah or Marcus, but it was enough to keep the silence at bay. I learned about their kids, their grandkids, their life stories. Their lives were so different, yet their struggles with aging, with loss, with family, felt so familiar. One morning, a man named Jim, an old kind-eyed fellow who used to own a small hardware store, saw me staring into my coffee. "You seem a little preoccupied, David," he said. I hesitated, but something in his eyes told me I could trust him. I told him about Ryan, not the whole story, but enough. About the calls, the money, the decision to block the number. I left out the part about the debt. That felt too personal, too much like a betrayal. I simply said, I had to do it. Jim listened, nodding slowly. "Family's a funny thing," he said. "You spend your whole life trying to build something, and then in the blink of an eye, it can all fall apart. My daughter, well, she got involved with a bad crowd, made some bad choices. I had to let her go, too. It's the hardest thing I've ever done." He didn't offer advice. He just offered a story of his own, a story of shared pain. The simple act of knowing I wasn't alone in this was a profound comfort. My problem wasn't unique. It was a human problem as old as time itself. One day I got a call from a number I recognized but couldn't place. I answered, a wave of dread washing over me. "Hello? David, it's Carol. Carol Harrison, from down the street." Carol Harrison. She was Sarah's best friend, a woman who lived 2 doors down and had been a second mother to Ryan when he was a kid. I hadn't spoken to her in a year or so, not since she'd moved. My heart hammered in my chest. "Carol, it's good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "Well, not really," she said, her voice dropping. "I ran into Ryan today. He didn't look well, David. He was at a gas station, a little out of the way. He was with a guy I didn't recognize, and they were arguing. He looked so thin. I tried to talk to him, but he just turned away and got in the car. It's not my place to say anything, but I was just worried. I thought you should know. The words hit me like a physical blow. The small fleeting glimpse I'd had on the highway wasn't my imagination. It was real. Ryan was in trouble. The rational part of me wanted to believe that he'd be fine, that he'd figure it out. But the father in me, the one who had spent a lifetime trying to protect his son, was screaming. The silence of the past few weeks, a silence I had so carefully cultivated, was now broken by the deafening sound of my own internal panic. The decision to block his number had felt so right, so necessary. Now, in the face of this new, troubling information, it felt like the most selfish and foolish thing I had ever done. Carol's call was a landmine I hadn't seen coming. The controlled, predictable world I had built for myself over the past weeks. A world of oil-stained workbenches, quiet coffee shops, and the slow, steady progress on the Mustang was shattered. Her words replayed in my head. He didn't look well, David. He was so thin. The image of him, frail and arguing with a stranger, was a stark contrast to the memory of the confident young man on his graduation day. The silence had been a buffer, a protection from the painful reality of my son's life. Now that buffer was gone, and I was exposed to the full raw force of his pain, I went to the garage but couldn't focus. The Mustang sat there, a monument to a simpler time, a project I was no longer capable of working on. My hands felt useless, my mind a jumble of what-ifs and regrets. I paced the concrete floor, the smell of gasoline and worn rubber doing nothing to soothe me. Marcus walked in and took one look at my face. He didn't have to ask. "Carol called," I said, the words barely a whisper. She saw him. Marcus sat on his oil drum, a patient, unmoving presence. "What did she say?" "She said he looks bad. He's with some guy she doesn't know. He wouldn't talk to her. He just turned away." I ran a hand through my hair, the stress of the moment a physical weight on my shoulders. I should have just given him the money. At least I would have known he was okay. "No," Marcus said firmly. "That's a trap, Dave. It's the same old cycle. Giving him money won't fix what's broken. It'll just keep the engine running, but it won't fix the engine itself. He'd just use it to buy whatever it is he's really after." "But what if he's in real trouble? What if he's hurting?" I argued, my voice thick with emotion. What kind of father turns his back on his son when he's at his lowest? "The kind of father who knows that a man has to hit bottom before he can start climbing up," Marcus countered. "Look, I get it. I'd be worried too. But you can't just throw a rope to a man who won't grab on. He has to reach out for it. And maybe this is the first time he's truly, finally reached bottom. Maybe now he'll realize he needs a different kind of help. Not money. Real help." His words made a cold, hard kind of sense, but they did little to soothe the frantic, worried part of me. The father's instinct to protect was a primal force, one that logic and reason had a hard time fighting against. That night, I drove. I had no destination in mind. I just drove through the streets of Detroit, a city that was a mirror of my own life. I passed the old Motown building, the grand but faded Fox Theater, the graffiti-covered warehouses of the industrial district. I remember driving these same streets with Ryan as a boy. I'd take him to Tigers games, to the Henry Ford Museum. He'd be in the back seat, his face pressed against the window, his eyes wide with the wonder of it all. I remembered his laugh, a bright, clear sound that filled the car. Where had that boy gone? What had happened to the kid who was so full of promise? Was it my fault? Had I given him too much, too easily? Was Sarah right? Had I been too hard on him? I replayed every conversation, every argument, every time I'd given in to his requests. Each memory was a small, sharp knife twisting in my gut. I found myself on the street where he'd lived for a while, a small, run-down apartment building with a flickering porch light. I drove by slowly, my heart pounding. The windows were dark. The street was quiet. There was no sign of him. I felt a mix of relief and crushing disappointment. I had driven all this way, my fatherly instincts screaming only to find nothing. The next day I made a decision. It was a dangerous one, a reckless one, but it felt right. I couldn't just sit at home waiting for a call that might never come. I couldn't ignore Carol's warning. I had to do something. But I wouldn't just go to his apartment and give him money. I had to find him. I had to see for myself what was going on. I had to face him, not as a source of money, but as a father who was scared and worried and wanted to understand. I called Marcus. "I'm going to look for him," I said. "I can't just sit here." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, Dave," he finally said, his voice soft. "Be careful. And remember what I said. Don't go there with your wallet open. Go with your heart open." His words echoed in my mind. Go with your heart open. It was a profound and terrifying idea. My heart had been closed to him for so long, protected by a hard shell of cynicism and disappointment. But now, in the face of his potential pain, that shell was cracking. I started with the gas station Carol had mentioned. It was a grimy, forgotten place on a corner where the city met the highway. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and cheap coffee. I went inside and talked to the young man behind the counter. He had a vacant stare, and I knew before I even asked that he hadn't noticed anything. I described Ryan, the car, the other guy. He just shook his head. They saw hundreds of people a day. It was a long shot. I drove around the neighborhood, the one I knew Ryan had lived in for a while. I drove past the apartment building, the local diner, the small convenience store where I knew he sometimes went. Nothing. It felt like I was chasing a ghost of a son I no longer knew, in a city I no longer recognized. As the sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the pavement, a wave of despair washed over me. I was alone in this, and I felt foolish for even trying. I was a man in his late 60s, driving around a city in a search for a son who had pushed me away for years. What was I hoping to find? A magical solution? A simple conversation that would fix everything? I was about to give up and head home when I saw a figure huddled on a bus stop bench a few blocks away. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the scene. The figure had his head in his hands. He was thin, and his shoulders were slumped in a posture of profound defeat. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. I drove past, my headlights briefly illuminating his face. It was him. It was Ryan. He looked so much worse than Carol had described. His clothes were dirty, his hair matted, his face gaunt. My hands gripping the steering wheel were shaking. He was alone. The other guy wasn't there. I pulled over to the curb and killed the engine. The silence was back, but this time it was different. This time it was a silence filled with a terrifying, crushing reality. I had to get out of the car. I had to face him. I had to talk to him. I had to show him that I was here, not with my wallet, but with my heart. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the cold night air, ready for whatever awaited me. The walk from my car to the bus stop bench felt like 100 miles. Every step was heavy, weighted with years of unspoken words, festering resentment, and a profound aching love that had been buried under layers of disappointment. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh yellow glow that made everything look old and tired. The cold night air nipped at my face, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the thumping of my heart in my chest, a drumbeat of fear and a fragile, desperate hope. Ryan didn't look up as I approached. He was hunched over, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He was wearing a thin jacket that looked too small for him, and his jeans were frayed at the knees. He was a shadow of the boy I remembered, a stranger on a lonely street corner. I stopped a few feet away. "Ryan," I said, my voice hoarse. He flinched, his head snapping up. His eyes, once so bright and full of life, were now dull and hollow. His face, gaunt and unshaven, was a mask of exhaustion and despair. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a flash of anger, and then a deep, weary resignation. "Dad?" he said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" I had to see you," I stammered, the practiced words I had prepared on the drive over vanishing from my mind. Carol called. She was worried. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course she did. She's always been a busybody." He stood up, the movement slow and pained, as if every joint in his body ached. He swayed slightly on his feet. "Look, if you came to lecture me, just save it. I'm not in the mood." "I'm not here to lecture you, Ryan," I said, my voice softening. "I'm not here to yell at you or to tell you what a disappointment you are. I'm here because I'm worried about you. You don't look well." He turned away, a flicker of shame on his face. I'm fine. I'm just tired. Ryan, you're not fine, I said, taking another step closer. I've been trying to find you all day. You haven't called. I was scared. I was afraid something was wrong. He turned back to me, and the anger was back in his eyes, sharp and bitter. Yeah? Well, you made that pretty clear when you blocked my number, didn't you? What was that, Dad, your big stand? I'm not an ATM anymore. Is that what you were trying to say? Did you think that would make me suddenly get my life together? The accusation stung, but I knew I had to remain calm. I did it because I was tired of being a walking wallet, Ryan. I was tired of the lies, the excuses, the constant disappointment. I was tired of our relationship being nothing but a transaction. It wasn't about the money, it was about you. It was about us. His face hardened. It was always about the money, Dad. You know it was. Every time I called, that was all we ever talked about. You never asked how I was or what I was doing, just, what do you need, Ryan? His words, sharp and cutting, were a blow. I saw the truth in them. He was right. Somewhere along the line, our relationship had become just that, a transactional exchange. It had been my fault too. I had let it happen. I had let the money become the only bridge between us. You're right, I said, the words a raw confession. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have done something a long time ago. I should have talked to you. I should have told you how I felt. But I was so afraid of you leaving. I was so afraid of losing you. So I gave you the money, thinking it would keep you close, but it just made things worse. My voice cracked. I looked at my son, this broken version of the boy I had loved so fiercely, and the years of pain and regret came crashing down on me. I wasn't just a father standing on a street corner talking to his estranged son. I was a man confronting all the mistakes he had made. The anger drained from Ryan's face, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He sank back onto the bench, running a hand over his tired eyes. I'm so tired, Dad. I'm so tired of all of this. I know, son, I said, my voice a low murmur. I know. I took a step closer and sat down on the bench beside him, leaving a small, respectful gap between us. The air was filled with a thick silence, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of absence, it was the silence of a shared moment, a silence filled with a fragile potential for understanding. I didn't have anywhere to go, he finally said, his voice barely audible. The guy I was living with, he found out I didn't have any money to give him. He kicked me out. I've been out here all night. My heart ached. The reality was so much worse than my fears. He wasn't just in trouble. He was homeless. He was alone. My decision to block his number, to finally draw a line in the sand, had forced him into a place of true desperation, and yet there was a part of me that felt a strange, cold sense of clarity. This was the bottom. This was the moment. I don't have a place to stay and I don't have any money, he said, his voice cracking. The shame in his eyes was palpable. He wouldn't meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Dad. I know I screwed everything up. I'm not a bad person. I just lost my way. We all lose our way sometimes, Ryan, I said, but you can find it again. I put my hand on his shoulder, a tentative, almost foreign gesture. He flinched at first, but then he leaned into the touch, a silent acknowledgement of his need. You don't need to be alone. I can help you, but I can't give you money. He looked at me then, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. Then what's the point? How can you help me if you can't help me? I can help you get back on your feet, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I can help you find a job. I can help you find a place. We can go to a shelter tonight. We can get you some food. But I can't just give you money that you'll lose. He stared at me, and I saw the internal struggle on his face, the reflex to ask, to beg, to manipulate, fighting against the raw truth of his situation. He was at a crossroads, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one holding the map. I was just standing there with him in the dark, and the path forward was his to choose. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the ground. A single silent tear rolled down his cheek. I didn't say anything. I just kept my hand on his shoulder, a constant, steady pressure. The cold night air and the buzzing streetlights seemed to fade away, leaving us in a small, quiet bubble of shared pain and a fragile, terrifying hope for a new beginning. The moment Ryan finally looked at me and said, "Okay, Dad," was a moment I will never forget. It was more than a simple agreement. It was a surrender. A silent acknowledgement that he had run out of road, that all his defenses and lies and manipulations had finally failed, and that the only thing left was the simple, frightening truth of his own desperation. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make another excuse. He just gave in. And in that moment, our relationship, so long a tangled mess of resentment and frustration, finally found a thread to pull on. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The car, once a place filled with laughter and conversation, was now a quiet space, a fragile bubble carrying two men who were strangers and yet knew each other better than anyone else in the world. I drove slowly, watching his reflection in the rearview mirror. His head was turned toward the window, the harsh glow of the streetlights illuminating a face that was thin and drawn, but no longer angry. The silence was still present, but it had changed. It was no longer the deafening, empty silence of my own home, nor was it the strained silence of our arguments. It was a new silence, one filled with the weight of unsaid things and a profound, nascent hope. When we got to my house, I unlocked the door, and the familiar smell of wood and old books, and the faint trace of Sarah's perfume filled the air. It was a smell I had grown so used to, I barely noticed it. But tonight, it seemed to hit Ryan. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes darting around the living room, a place he hadn't been in a year. I saw a flicker of the old Ryan in his eyes, the boy who used to run in here and throw his backpack on the floor. "Come on," I said softly. "I'll make you some coffee." He just nodded and followed me into the kitchen. I made 2 cups, the sound of the percolating coffee, a welcome noise in the quiet room. He sat at the counter, a ghost in my own home, and I placed a steaming mug in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it as if trying to draw warmth from it. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice a little clearer now. "You're welcome, son," I said. It was the first time I'd called him that in a long time without feeling a sense of dread. We talked for a long time. It wasn't a lecture, not from me. It was a confession, from him. He told me about the last year. He had lost his job a few months ago. He'd been staying on a friend's couch, but the friend had gotten tired of him. He'd gotten into some trouble, nothing major, but enough to make it difficult to find a new job. He hadn't been to a real grocery store in weeks. He'd been living on whatever he could scrape together. The excuses he'd given me had all been lies, but they were rooted in a truth I hadn't wanted to see. His life was a mess. The shame was etched into every word he spoke. "I'm not a good person, Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "I took advantage of you. I used you. I'm sorry." "I know, Ryan," I said, "and I forgive you. But you have to forgive yourself too. And you have to show me, and yourself, that you can change." He stayed the night, sleeping in his old bedroom. I spent the night on the couch, unable to sleep. I just lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of the house and the new, comforting sound of my son breathing in the room down the hall. For the first time in years, the silence in my house was a good silence. It was the silence of a home that was no longer empty. The next morning, the real work began. I didn't give him a single dollar. Instead, I drove him to a local job center. We sat in the waiting room for hours, filling out forms, talking to counselors. The process was slow and frustrating, but I stayed with him. I was there, a steady, physical presence, a silent promise of support. He looked at me at one point, his eyes filled with a kind of awe. "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" he asked, his voice low. "No, son," I said. "I'm not going to leave you. Not this time." That afternoon, we went to a local food bank. I let him go in alone, standing outside, watching through the window. It was a small, necessary humiliation. He had to stand in line with others, a visible sign of his need. But he did it. He came out with a box of groceries, a small victory that felt like a monumental one. "We need to get you an apartment, a small one," I said. "I can help with the first month's rent, but you have to promise me you'll pay me back. Not in money, in effort, in sobriety, in finding a job." He nodded, his eyes shining with a new, unfamiliar light. Hope. A fragile, flickering flame in the darkness. "I will, Dad. I promise. I swear to you, I'll get it right this time." I didn't just give him the money. I went with him to find a small furnished apartment in a decent neighborhood. I helped him move the few things he had. I went to the store and bought him groceries, the kind of food that would nourish him. I helped him fill out job applications, and I called in a few favors from some of my old connections. One of them was a construction foreman, a man I had known for 30 years. I called him and told him the story, leaving out the specifics but explaining that my son had been through a rough patch and needed a second chance. He was skeptical, but he agreed to give Ryan a trial. The day Ryan started his new job, I drove him there. We didn't talk much. The air was tense with anticipation. He was nervous, and I was too. I dropped him off, and as he walked toward the construction site, a man in a hard hat and work boots, I felt a familiar pang of fear. But this time it was different. It wasn't the fear that he would call, it was the fear that he would fail. But this time I knew he wouldn't fail alone. I was here, and this time he wasn't just my son, he was my project, he was my Mustang, and I was going to see this one through to the end. The first few weeks were a delicate dance, a slow, painstaking process of rebuilding trust. Ryan was working hard, coming home every day exhausted and sore, but with a new sense of purpose in his eyes. He'd tell me about the job, the crew he was working with, the foreman who was tough but fair, the physical demands that were slowly replacing the emotional and mental weight he had carried for so long. I didn't pry, but I listened. Really listened. For the first time in a very long time, our conversations weren't about money. They were about life. He'd come over for dinner almost every night. I'd cook the food Sarah used to make, simple, comforting meals like meatloaf and mashed potatoes or chicken noodle soup. He'd eat with a hunger I hadn't seen in years, and I'd just watch him, my heart filled with a complex mix of relief and sorrow. He was getting better, but I knew the road was long and the past was not something that could be erased with a few hot meals and a new job. One evening he was helping me in the garage. He was holding a flashlight steady as I worked on the Mustang's engine. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sounds of tools clinking and the faint smell of oil. "I called your old phone," he said out of the blue, his voice low. I paused, my wrench in midair. "Yeah?" "Yeah, the day you blocked me. I called from a friend's phone. I told him it was an emergency. He was mad at me, but he let me. I wanted to say I was sorry. I knew you were gone, but I needed to tell you." My throat tightened. "I didn't get the message. I know." The friend hung up before it could go through. He said he was tired of my crap. I don't blame him. I put the wrench down and looked at him. "Ryan, I want you to know something. I was ready to give up on you. I was tired. I was so tired. I had convinced myself that I was better off without you, that I would never have to worry again. I didn't realize that the worry was a part of being a father." I looked at him, and I saw the raw, honest truth in his eyes. The call from Carol, it scared me more than any of your past requests, because I realized I had cut myself off from the most important part of my life. I had shut the door on you. And the moment I did, I realized I had shut the door on myself, too. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm not a bad person. I just had a lot of demons." "I know," I said, "and we'll fight them together." I meant it. The relationship was no longer a one-way street. It was a partnership. The weeks turned into months. Ryan got his first full paycheck. He came over to my house, a crisp envelope in his hand. "This is for you, Dad," he said. "The first payment on the rent. I know I have a long way to go to pay you back, but this is the first step." I looked at the envelope. It was the first time he'd ever offered me money without me having to ask. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than any amount of money I had ever given him. I took it, and I folded it, and put it in my wallet. Not because I needed it, but because it was a tangible symbol of his commitment. He started saving and he started talking to a counselor at the job center, a man who had helped him get his life on track. He was slowly, painfully, rebuilding his life from the ground up. He wasn't perfect. There were bad days, days when he was moody or withdrawn, but he was fighting, he was working, he was trying. I started taking him to the garage with me more often. He'd watch me work on the Mustang, and slowly he started asking questions. What's that part for? How do you do that? I started teaching him the basics of car repair. He was a natural. He had a good eye and he was patient. He'd spend hours with me, his hands greasy, his mind engaged. One day we were talking about the Mustang. It's beautiful, he said. It's a lot of work, but it's beautiful. It's a metaphor, son, I said. For life, for us. It's old and broken and it's seen better days, but with a lot of hard work and a little bit of love, it can be beautiful again. He just nodded. He got it. He knew I wasn't just talking about the car. Then, one evening, he was having dinner with me. He had finished his meal and was just sitting there, quiet. I called her Dad, he said, his voice low. Who? I asked, my heart skipping a beat. Carol, I wanted to thank her. She told me she was the one who called you. I wanted to tell her thank you and to say I was sorry for being a jerk. What did she say when I asked? She said she was proud of me. She said it was about time. She told me to say hello to you. He smiled, a tired but genuine smile. It was the first real smile I'd seen on his face in years. I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over. It wasn't just the fact that he was talking to Carol. It was the fact that he had called her, on his own, to thank her. It was a sign of his humility, his willingness to admit his mistakes, and his desire to make things right. It was a sign that he wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was rebuilding himself. The silence that had once defined our relationship was now replaced by a quiet conversation. A conversation not just of words, but of actions. The Mustang, once a symbol of my own loneliness and frustration, was now a symbol of our shared project, our shared commitment. And every day I looked at it and I saw the work we were putting in, not just on the car, but on ourselves. The long road back was a long, hard climb, but we were on it, together. A year passed, and the change was nothing short of a miracle. Ryan was a different man. The gaunt, hollow-eyed figure I had found on the bus stop bench was gone, replaced by a man with a steady gaze and a quiet confidence. He had a new job, a stable apartment, and a growing circle of friends from his work. He was no longer just surviving, he was living. Our routine was a comfortable rhythm. He'd still come over for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. We'd talk about work, about our lives, about the news. The conversations were easy and natural, no longer strained by unspoken tension. He was saving money, paying his bills, and for the first time in his adult life he was a responsible, functioning man. The Mustang was finished. It was a gleaming, beautiful piece of automotive history, a testament to the hours of labor and patience we had poured into it. We had worked on it together side by side, and every smooth curve and polished chrome detail was a reminder of how far we had come. The last thing we did was to polish the chrome bumper. We stood there looking at our reflections, 2 men who had been broken and had been put back together again. "It's beautiful, Dad," Ryan said, his voice filled with pride. "It's our masterpiece, son," I said. "We did it." He looked at me, a genuine smile on his face. "I'm going to get my own project car soon," he said. "A '69 Camaro. I've always loved them." My heart swelled. He was talking about the future, a future that he was building, not just wishing for. One evening he came over for dinner, and he had something in his hand. It was a small, worn leather wallet. He put it on the table and slid it over to me. "What's this?" I asked, my voice a little tight. "It's all of it," he said. "Every cent. I wrote it all down. Every time you gave me money. This is the last of it. All the money you gave me over the years." I looked at the wallet. The worn leather, the faint scuff marks, the creases of a long, difficult journey. I looked at him, and I saw the honesty in his eyes. He wasn't giving me the money just to pay me back. He was giving it to me as a symbol of his old life, the one he had left behind. "Ryan, you don't have to do this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't do it for the money. I did it because I'm your father. I know, he said, but I have to. I have to get rid of this. I have to close the door on it. And I want to thank you. Not just for the money, but for blocking my number. It was the best thing you could have ever done for me. It forced me to face my own problems. It forced me to stop relying on you and to start relying on myself. It was the hardest thing you ever did, but it was also the most loving. I took the wallet. I didn't open it. I just held it in my hand. It was a weight, a heavy symbolic weight, of a past I was ready to let go of. So, what do you say? He said, his voice a little shaky. Do you think we can finally just be a family again? I didn't answer right away. I just sat there looking at him. I saw the man he had become, the man who had fought his way back from the brink, the man who had humbled himself, who had owned his mistakes, who was fighting to be a better person. I had always loved the boy he had been, but I was so proud of the man he was becoming. Yeah, son, I said, my voice cracking. I think we can. I think we finally can. The next week, something happened that solidified our new relationship. I was in the garage working on a new project, a friend's old pickup truck, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go, but then I remembered the last time an unknown number had called. I answered. Hello? Dad? Hey, it's me. Ryan's voice, warm and casual, came through the line. I'm just calling to say hi. I'm having a good day. How are you? My heart leaped in my chest. He wasn't calling to ask for money. He wasn't calling with an excuse. He was just calling to talk. He was calling to say hi. I'm good, son, I said, my voice filled with a joy I hadn't felt in a very long time. I'm just good. The conversation was short, just a simple check-in, but it meant more than any long, drawn-out conversation about money or problems. It was a quiet, simple act of love, a promise. That evening, as I sat on my easy chair, the house felt different. It wasn't a silent house anymore. It was a quiet house, a peaceful house. The silence that had once been a source of pain and anxiety was now a source of comfort. The phone, once a source of dread, was now a tool for connection. I looked at the picture of Sarah on the mantelpiece, a small framed photo from our wedding day. She was smiling, her eyes bright with a future she had no idea would be so hard, but so filled with love. I smiled at her. I didn't have to talk to her anymore. The question she had asked me all those years ago, isn't that what a father is supposed to be, a safety net? I had finally found the answer. I had been a safety net. I had been a crutch. But now, I was a father. And a father, I had learned, was more than just a source of money. He was a source of support, a source of guidance, a source of love. And sometimes, the most loving thing a father can do is to let his son go so he can finally learn to stand on his own 2 feet. I looked at my phone. It was silent, but it was no longer empty. It was full of a new, profound and beautiful kind of love, the one I had almost lost forever. The months that followed were a testament to the slow, steady power of reconciliation. The fragile truce we had formed on the street corner had blossomed into a real, meaningful relationship. Ryan was a constant presence in my life, but in a new, healthier way. He would call just to talk, just to see how I was. He'd come over for dinner, and sometimes he'd bring a bottle of wine or a bag of groceries, a small, quiet way of contributing. He was no longer a ghost in my house. He was a living, breathing part of it. He took the money he had paid me back and started a savings account. He wanted to be ready for the day he would get his own place, his own car, his own life. The boy who once lived for the next handout was now planning for his future. It was a beautiful thing to witness. I was no longer the sole financial provider, the one who held all the cards. We were a team, a partnership, each of us supporting the other in our own way. I went with him to look at a Camaro. It was a '69, just like he had said, a beautiful rusted shell of a car sitting in a salvage yard. He had been saving up for it for months, and he was finally ready to buy it. We stood there looking at it, and I saw the same look in his eyes that I had once had when I looked at my Mustang. It was a look of pure, unadulterated passion. "It's a lot of work," he said. "We can do it," I said without hesitation. I can help. He looked at me, his eyes wide. You'd help me. Of course, son, I said. This is what we do. We bought the car, and we hauled it back to my garage. It was a mess, a beautiful, broken mess. We spent the next few months working on it side by side. It was a different kind of project than the Mustang. The Mustang had been an act of lonely self-preservation. The Camaro was a symbol of our shared future, a project we were building together. He had a new friend, a woman named Emily, a kind, soft-spoken artist who worked at a local coffee shop. She was different from the women he had dated in the past. She was stable and she was kind. She saw the good in him and she encouraged him. I saw the way he looked at her, and I saw a man who was falling in love for the first time with the right person. One Sunday he brought her over for dinner. I was nervous, but I needn't have been. She was a beautiful, kind woman, and she treated him with a respect and a love that he had never had before. She saw the man he was becoming, not the man he had been. David, he's told me so much about you, she said, her voice soft. He's told me how you helped him. He told me about the Mustang. He's a very proud son. My throat tightened. He's a good man, I said. He just needed a little push. Later that night, after she left, he came into the kitchen and put his arm around my shoulder. Thanks, Dad, he said, for everything. I just nodded, and I put my arm around him. It was a simple, unspoken gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of our love, of our shared journey. The silence was back, but this time it was a beautiful silence, a silence filled with a love that had been hard-won, and that was all the more precious for it. The final few months of the year were a blur. Ryan got a promotion at work. He moved into a new apartment, a small, clean place of his own. The Camaro was slowly, beautifully coming back to life. He was a new man, a man with a future. One evening he called me. "Hey, Dad," he said, "are you busy?" "Never too busy for you, son," I said. I just wanted to call and say thanks," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Thanks for everything, for not giving up on me, for being the father you always were, even when I didn't deserve it." My eyes welled up with tears. I didn't say anything, I didn't need to. The silence was filled with our shared understanding, our love, our bond. It was a bond that had been forged in the fires of pain and disappointment, but it was a bond that was stronger than anything I had ever known. The next day I was in the garage working on the Mustang. I was polishing the chrome, and the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow on the old car. I looked at my reflection in the polished surface, and I saw a man who was older, who was tired, but who was also, for the first time in a very long time, whole. I looked at my phone. It was silent, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with memories of the past, with the hope of the future, and with the love of a son I had almost lost forever. Another year slipped by, and life settled into a rhythm I had never thought possible. Ryan's life was no longer a series of crises, but a steady progression of small victories. He got another promotion at his job, and he and Emily moved into a small house on the outskirts of Detroit. It was a modest place, but it was their own, a quiet, tangible symbol of the life they were building together. The Camaro was nearly done, a gleaming, beautiful machine that represented a new chapter for both of us. The calls continued, but they were different now. They weren't panicked pleas for money. They were simple check-ins. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to see how you're doing." "Hey, Dad, I'm thinking of you." They were the kind of calls a father dreams of getting from his son, the kind of calls that mean something. One evening, Ryan called, "Hey, Dad, can you come over? I need your help with something." My heart leaped into my throat, a reflexive reaction I was still trying to unlearn. "What's wrong, son?" "Nothing's wrong," he said, his voice filled with a quiet joy. I have a surprise for you." I drove over to his new house, and as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a familiar sight. In the garage, sitting under a tarp, was a beautiful old Mustang. It was a different color than mine, a beautiful deep green, but it was the same model. My heart started to beat a little faster. "What's this?" I asked, my voice a little tight. "It's a gift," he said, pulling the tarp off. "It's for you. It's a thank you for everything you've done for me, for the Mustang, for the Camaro, for helping me." I just stood there, speechless, looking at the car. It was a beautiful, old, perfectly preserved Mustang. A classic. It was a symbol of all the hard work we had put in, of all the love we had given, of all the hope we had found. "Ryan," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to. I wanted to show you that I'm not just your son anymore. I'm your partner. I'm your friend. I'm your equal." I put my hand on his shoulder, and I looked at him, and I saw a man who was whole, a man who was happy, a man who was loved, a man who had found his way home. "Thank you, son," I said. "Thank you for being you." Later that evening, as I sat in his living room talking with him and Emily, I looked around at the life he had built. It wasn't a life of luxury or extravagance. It was a life of quiet, simple dignity, a life he had earned. I looked at my phone lying on the table. It was silent, but it was no longer empty. It was full of memories of the past, of the pain and the heartache, and of the love and the hope that had brought us here. It was a symbol of a relationship that had been broken and had been put back together again. I remembered the day I had blocked his number, the fear, the anger, the doubt. I remembered the silence, the deafening, empty silence of my own home. I had done it out of desperation, a last-ditch effort to save myself. But in doing so, I had also saved him. The journey had been long, and it had been hard, but it had been worth it. The silent, empty space I had created had been filled with a new kind of love, a love that was stronger, deeper, and more real than anything I had ever known. A love that was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, even in the most broken of relationships, there is always hope. There is always a way back. And sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is also the most loving. I looked at Ryan, and I smiled. He was a son I was proud of. And I was a father who had finally, truly, found his way home.